If you're a business owner or you work in a C-suite or you're in charge of, responsible for an organization's efforts to kind of weather the storm, I mean, a lot of it is 6 inches in front of your face right now. I mean, most of the calls that we're taking and we're having with clients is, how do I jump ahead of kind of recalibrating our revenue model? And for brick and mortar or for people that are impacted by supply chain disruption, everything is somewhat of a scramble. And so I'm sure people are asking the same questions if they're involved in business, which is how do I incentivize my customers or my consumers to continue to pay me, maybe in a different way? How do I deliver my products or services? So you look at restaurants, right? Those are getting hit very hard for the last week and a half. And so we've seen so many of our restaurateurs go to 100% takeout / delivery. And good news, I mean, some people are still getting a high level of demand because so many people, are at home and are ordering takeout. So the restaurants have been pivoting quickly, and that's been helpful for them to keep revenue up. But then I guess a couple other big things is, obviously there's probably going to be a drop, and there is being a drop, there has been a drop in top line revenue. So a lot of the things we're encouraging people to do is to look at all of your vendor agreements, look at all your lease, your loan agreements, be proactive with reaching out to creditors, especially the banks and landlords, and talk about, how can we put in somewhat of a deferral plan here? How can we get somewhat of a relief, at least for, people are talking 2, 3, 4 months. Because even, we don't know how long lasting this is going to be on the market, the impact of the government's efforts to thwart the spread of the virus. But my business owners are looking at a 4 to 6 month runway here. We're going to have disruptions for at least 4 to 6 months, assuming everything even goes back to somewhat normal, right, in 2 to 3 months. So really being proactive with the creditors is huge. There are certain provisions in agreements. So for instance, there's this concept called force majeure, which is kind of an events-driven justification to stop performing. That can, avoid going into default. So if you're a business owner, looking at all your vendor contracts is huge. And I guess the other side of it is the employment side of the house. This is something that Congress tackled heavily last week. And I believe it was late Wednesday night, the new act, which amended the FMLA, went into effect. I'm going to pull it up here. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act was passed. And since then, as you can imagine, from a business owner's perspective, we've had a flood of, labor and employment questions. How do I legally and both ethically, curtail my employment costs? How do I have a reduction in force event, knowing that there's a high likelihood that we'll need these folks back, and we're going to want them back 100% once things die down and once things are able to go back to some modicum of normalcy. So we've been walking and kind of shepherding our clients through that process. It's somewhat dense. Every employer, every employee, when assessed on whether you can either let them go, whether and how much their benefits have to continue to be provided, compensation paid. So this act has provided all of us attorneys a brand new law that we've been kind of interpreting and advising on real time. So it's been intense. Managements around the country and certainly with our clientele are actively coming up with plans in multiple tranches of, okay, assuming revenue dips by X, here's how we're going to cut costs. Here's the specific costs we're going to cut. Obviously, employment's a huge part of that. So as people are retrofitting, for instance, is an example in the restaurant space, as they're retrofitting their offering to be 100% takeout or delivery, they're running on skeleton crews. And so people have been doing a lot of it, which we're recommending more often than not, are implementing furlough plans as opposed to termination. That's a real case-by-case basis, but it's really the number one question is how do I cut costs and how much cash do I have? What's my AR look like? If I have to ride this thing out for 3 to 6 months, they're asking us to help step in and make judgment calls with them on legal exposure and really just prioritizing expenses. From an employee's perspective, the furlough is really, your work gets cut, whether it's 100%, 50%. It really depends on how the employer implements the furlough or the reduction in force plan. But the number one place to go to is to really look at, the unemployment compensation, signing up quickly with the state, which is a state-specific, plan that every state has for its labor force that gets unemployed. So if you're one of those people who gets furloughed, then or even terminated, termination's a little bit more hairy. But on the furlough side, certainly getting on unemployment as quickly as you can is what we're telling people.